Look at Chapter 3. I know you are excited. Student abilities and challenges. I just want you to know that I am impressed that you are watching the videos. Very impressed. Okay, if you remember the quote we began with in discussing Chapter 2, it said, "In our multicultural society, culturally responsive teaching reflects democracy at its highest level. It means doing whatever it takes to ensure that every child is achieving and ever moving toward realizing his or her potential." Gibson said that. I believe we're going to see a pattern forming as we go through this chapter, Student Abilities and Challenges. In this chapter, the question forms, and it's our guide for decision making. As we make decisions, we have to think of this question and make sure that our decision making is a student-centered orientation. What's best for kids? And so anything that we do needs to be what's best for kids. For instructional leaders, No Child Left Behind and its focus on ensuring the academic progress of every child has shifted the question to what's best for this child in this subject, in this specific situation, at this point in time. This means that instructional leaders are now responsible for a multitude of classrooms with numerous teachers and students. And this can be an overwhelming responsibility. Instructional leaders now take on the additional title of being a student-focused leader. So how in the world are we going to use this information in Chapter 3 to become student-focused leaders, which is really what this chapter is about, really what all your chapters are about, is how do you use what you're reading in order to become better as an instructional leader. Our text reminds us of a few key points in regard to student abilities and challenges. We want to make sure that we ask our teachers to look for times when the student is engaged, even short times, and to note what is different about them. I love that thought process. It's not a difficult thought, but what if we made a list of that? I think we would really begin to shift our focus to more of the student as opposed to what are we teaching, as what do the students need us to be teaching. They would discover the student's strengths, and then we would be amazed, and we would allow ourselves to be amazed by them. So our text is going to remind us of some key points in regard to student abilities and challenges. These points are things that you have heard probably a million times as a teacher, but as an instructional leader, the question is, do these change any for you when you hear them again, if you think of them from that perspective? No matter what grade or subject you supervise, your teachers are going to work with students with learning challenges in their classroom. There are really three major points of interest to principals and instructional leaders. We make sure that we have the least restrictive placement. We protect the rights of the students with disabilities and the rights of their parents. And we have IEPs, the Individualized Education Program. And as the instructional leader, you will be in charge of those, and you will have to think about that. No matter the inclusion situation or student, it is important for teachers to know these kinds of instructional strategies. We have to make sure that they use their time efficiently by having smooth management routines. They have to avoid discipline problems, and they have to plan carefully. We have to make sure that they can ask questions at the right level of difficulty, give support, positive feedback to students, help them figure out the right answer if they're on the right track, and how to put them on the right track if they have an incorrect answer. Now we're going to look at the rest of the chapter as we think about this information and how it's beneficial to us as a leader to those who are in the classroom. So we're going to look at the text. If you really thought about this right now, you could watch this video and go through this, and you will have read the text instead of reading the chapter on your own. Page 60, Nature of Intelligence. Most of the early theories had three different themes. They talked about the capacity to learn, a student's capacity to learn, the total knowledge that a person has acquired, and the ability to adapt successfully to new situations and to the environment in general. Added to these themes later on is the need for higher order thinking. Okay, so that's one thing we're going to look at the text just to remind us about that. The second is Howard Gardner. I know we've probably heard about him a million times. He states that there are different types of intelligences but they're not, eight's not the magic number. I think it's very interesting that the text mentions, and it's something we need to be mindful of, is that everyone learns differently, but not that every lesson has to be adapted to encompass all eight intelligences. Often teachers are trying to do all eight intelligences in one lesson when it doesn't lend itself to that intelligence. The chapter really provides an instructional leader an excellent resource on page 62, with the misuses and uses of the Gardner's theory are discussed. Excellent example of how they are misused. We need to make sure that they take the individual differences of students seriously and to differentiate their instructions to connect with each student. This book will help with that. And it's very important that any kind of skill or discipline should be taught in different appropriate ways, but not in 8 ways every time. I think that's very interesting and something we have to remind our teachers about. Next is successful intelligence on page 64. It includes the skills and knowledge needed for success in life, according to one's own definition of success within one's own social, cultural context. So this goes back to knowing your students, particularly to the assignment that you had in the last chapter about is the teacher knowledgeable of their students? Do they understand where they come from, their culture, their background? Because successful intelligence means that we understand where the students come from and how they might work best in the classroom to learn the best way in the classroom. And when we're looking at students' abilities and the challenges in the classroom, this is very important for us to remember in terms of their cognitive process approach. And so it's important for us as instructional leaders to understand that intelligent behavior is marked by 2 characteristics: the insight or the ability to deal effectively with novel situations, new situations, or automaticity, the ability to become efficient and automatic in thinking and problem solving. And so reading through Sternberg's theory helps us to understand about this successful intelligence and how it would apply to our classroom. Next is WISC, which is Wisdom, Intelligence, Creativity, Synthesize, and it's a theory. And generally we think of this as an IQ score. It's important for us to realize that those words are wisdom, intelligence, creativity, synthesized. So it's not always a score that we're dealing with. We need to remember that it's about creativity to generate new ideas and problems, as well as solutions to the problems. It's when students have the analytical intelligence to evaluate the quality of the solutions. So do they understand where the strength lies in the solutions? Are they good? They're bad? And then the practical intelligence, which would go back to the successful intelligence, to implement decisions and persuade others of the value of the decisions made. And then the wisdom to ensure that these decisions help to achieve a common good over long-term situations. Like I said before, this is just reminders to us about things that are important as instructional leaders to make sure that our teachers are remembering and understanding. I loved this point and counterpoint in our chapter. It's talking about tracking and detracking, ability grouping, flexible grouping, and making sure that we understand what that means. That if we pay careful attention to every student's achievement, that may mean different answers at different times. It may be appropriate to ability group them, flexible group them, tracking through high school, but that may be a different thing at different times. We're grouping and regrouping our students based on their learning needs, based on their intelligences, and remembering to do that often and not stick them in one place for a very long period of time, and to encourage our teachers to be very fluid with that. Page 71 has excellent theory into practice, guidelines for ability grouping. Your assignment for this chapter actually comes or begins on page 72, dealing with students who are identified as gifted and talented students, or even your above average ones. When you think of gifted and talented, there's actually 3-part conception of the giftedness. These children are above average general ability, a high level of creativity, and a high level of task commitment or motivation to achieve. It was curious to me, someone did a survey and mentioned it in the book on page 72, and that it's ask a student, what do you want to tell a teacher, or how do you feel in your classroom? And the student said, waiting for teachers to move ahead, waiting for classmates to catch up, waiting to learn something new, always waiting. And I think we need to be reminded of that. Often we pay attention to the low end and the middle, and our high students we don't really pay or heed much attention to. ADHD is talked a great deal about in this chapter as well. On page 75, reminding us to look for times when the student is engaged. Again, what I mentioned at the beginning of this, discover where their strengths are and make sure that we build on the strengths. Make sure that we help them in the classroom to be able to pay attention, understand that they may not be able to stay in their seats, and understand about the blurting of answers and dealing with those in an appropriate manner. We need to help them to learn the social skills that they needed to in order to participate effectively in the classroom without binding them so much that they can't have their own personality. Next is learning disabilities. Any teacher that you have is going to have children in their classroom, especially with RTI. These children are mainstreamed into our classroom, and we have to make sure that we accommodate for them. It means that they are performing significantly below what would be expected given their other abilities. They don't know how to focus on relevant information. They can't get organized. They can't apply learning strategies and study skills. They can't change skills when one isn't working, and they can't evaluate their own learning. I loved on page 79 where it had a resource for instructional leader, the tree for supporting elementary students in persuasive writing. It's one of many different things that you could give to your teachers in order for them to work with children who are learning disabled. And the last one that they talk about is children in the autism spectrum. These children that are in our classroom, they have disorders, and it's difficult for them to explain their own behaviors. They don't understand about other people's feelings, and it's very hard for them to predict how behaviors might affect emotions. These children are brilliant at times, and we have to make sure that our instruction leaders are doing what they need to do to be able to have a classroom that is functional for them, where these students feel as a part of the classroom. And it's important for us as instructional leaders to make sure we understand the autism spectrum and Asperger's syndrome in order for us to assist our teachers. All right, to conclude, obviously, the principal's role as instructional leader has never been more important than when considered in the context of meeting the needs of every child. As a result, reviewing, understanding, and effectively applying research regarding the emotional, social, academic, and physical development of individual students is an essential component of decision making. So, as an instruction leader, if you don't understand all of the things that are discussed in this chapter and how these student abilities and challenges affect your school, then you as an instructional leader need to do some learning and some growing. It is important for us to remember that each student comes to our school in the hopes of receiving the best education that he or she can have. And we as instructional leaders need to make sure that they have a place in order to do that. You will find that you have an assignment for this chapter. It does deal with students who are above average, high achieving, and giftedness, as well as TCAP scores. Basically, the assignment is your TCAP scores have just come in and you're reviewing them, and you realize that your high achieving and gifted students are showing no growth and showing no achievement. So you are charged with coaching this grade level to success. So what suggestions will you provide them, and what resources will you suggest? You can pick any scenario that you want: grade level, math, reading, how many teachers, but you have to give them at least 2 webinars, videos, or blogs so that the teachers can use as a resource. You need to provide an agenda for your first meeting and how you're going to approach the subject area. Best wishes. Enjoy this project. There are more details in Blackboard about this, and thanks again for watching the video. I appreciate it. Have a terrific rest of the week, and I will see you again when we begin exploring our next chapter.